Longevity and Energy. My name is Luton Alvarado. Raise your hand if any of you would like to live to 100. Of those who didn't raise their hand, can you think about why you may not want to live to 100? I think one of the most common reasons as to why people don't want to live to 100 is because of the conception that once you get old, you get diseased and you get suffering, and that puts people off. So I'm here to tell you that actually that's not necessarily the case, that you can live to 100 and in good health and full of energy. So, I just wanted to tell you a bit about my story. My story is that during lockdown, my parents were living in an annex next to my house, and they weren't in particularly good health. My mum suffered from Alzheimer's, and my dad was losing his memory too. And that was quite painful for me to see them ill, and they were just surviving. They weren't thriving. And at the same time, I decided to listen to podcasts on health and well-being and longevity. And I learned a lot from these podcasts, from listening to experts in the field. And what I learned from them was that everyone was saying similar things about longevity and energy. And so from that point in time, I decided to start implementing what I'd learned into my own life. And so my mission now has become twofold. One was to implement as much as I can as I've learned from these podcasts and experts. And two, to try and spread my knowledge as much as possible to as many people as possible. And so here I am. First thing I want to talk to you about is intermittent fasting. What is intermittent fasting? Intermittent fasting is, another word for intermittent fasting, is time-restricted eating. What does that mean? That means any period of time that you're not eating food. Typically that is between 12 and 16 hours, but I would suggest the most optimal time to intermittent fast is 14 hours. What does that mean? That means that from the time that you ate your last meal to the time that you eat your first meal, it's a period of 14 hours. So for example, if your last meal was at 7 p.m, then your first meal for breakfast would be 9 a.m. the next day. And intermittent fasting has many benefits to it. A couple of case studies. The first one I want to talk to you about is a man by the name of Sachin Panda. He is a scientist, and many years ago he conducted an experiment. So the experiment he conducted was he took two sets of mice and fed them exactly the same amount of food, same calories, same food. The only difference was that with one set of mice, he fed them over a period of 24 hours, and the other set of mice were able to eat their food in one go, or as quickly as they wanted. And the results were quite astounding, because despite having the same amount of calories and the same food, the set of mice that ate within the smaller window ended up being in good health, and the set of mice that were given food over a 24-hour period were diseased and were in bad health. And that just shows the power of what intermittent fasting can do for you. Now, has anyone heard of this gentleman here? His name is Dr. Rangan Chatterjee. This man, he conducts a podcast called Feel Better, Live More, and he's one of the first people that I listened to. And in 2018, he interviewed someone called Jeanette Hyde, who's a nutritional therapist. And many of her patients have conditions like irritable bowel syndrome and ulcerative colitis. And the only way that she treated them was by telling them to intermittent fast. So in other words, fast for 16 hours. And that might be between 7 p.m. being their last meal, and then working forward 16 hours. The first meal after that might be at 11 a.m. And what she found, the results were astounding. But these people with irritable bowel syndrome, who had done this intermittent fasting for 30 days, were either cured or their conditions had significantly improved. And that again shows what intermittent fasting can do for you. That might involve starting the first meal of the day at midday, depending on what time you ate your last meal. And some people might say, well, what about breakfast? Isn't breakfast the most important meal of the day? Well, I'd say, yes, that is true. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. But the fact that you're having your first meal at midday doesn't mean that it's not breakfast. Hence, the words break fast essentially mean you're breaking your fast. In terms of plants, if you think about plants, what would happen if you gave a plant and fed the plant water every 2 hours and flooded it with water? Do you think it would thrive, or do you think it would not? I would suggest that feeding a plant, flooding it with water every 2 hours is not good for you. And for that reason, the same applies to us. Our guts and intestines need a break and a rest. And by giving our intestines a rest, we're allowing the beneficial bacteria in our gut to proliferate, and that is the foundation of our immune system. Now, to get better benefits, you can extend your fast to 20 to 24 hours. It's not something that you're necessarily going to do regularly, but once in a while, it's of extreme benefit to you. And the reason for that is this, is that as you age, our mitochondria, which are the powerhouses in our cells, and other components of our cells, then degenerate and become dysfunctional. And as they become dysfunctional, that then takes away the energy from the rest of the cells. And as a result, our energy gets depleted. But when we fast for 20 to 24 hours, the components within these cells then get recycled, and the mitochondria, the dysfunctional ones, get removed. And that then improves the benefits of the rest of our cells, and it increases our energy significantly. So 20 to 24 hour fast, I try and do them once a month, and that will give you a whole host of additional energy. Now, moving on to muscle. Why is muscle good for you? Muscle is good for you because it protects you in various ways. And did you know that over the age of 31, we lose 1% of muscle mass every year over the age of 30? So as we grow older, our muscle mass depletes, and that can result in then injuries. So did you know that falling is the second most common unintentional injury death? So if you fall and you're of a certain age, the chances of you dying, directly or indirectly, from that fall is quite significant. Where does muscle fit into all of this? Well, if we have got muscle, there are 3 benefits to this. Firstly, muscle in our legs acts as a foundation. So if you imagine a tree trunk being extremely stable, and the more stability you've got in your legs, the less likely it is that you're going to fall. The second reason is that muscle acts as armour. So if you imagine that your muscle acting as a coat of armour, if you fall, you're less likely to break your bones. And the third reason for it is that when you grow muscle, it pulls on your bones and strengthens your bones. And therefore, if you do fall, you're less likely to fracture your bones. So that's the importance of growing muscle, even from an early age, and to be consistent with it. Now, moving on to protein. We can't build muscle unless we're consuming adequate amounts of protein. But how much protein should we be consuming in the day? I would suggest that you should be consuming 1 gram per kilogram that you weigh. So if you weigh 76 kilograms, you should be having 76 grams of protein a day. When should you be having this? I would suggest it should be 30 grams first thing in the morning. Why? Because if you have a large amount of protein first thing in the morning, it's good for muscle protein synthesis. What is muscle protein synthesis? It's the ability to grow muscle in response to the consumption of protein. And you need protein for the amino acids that it contains in order to grow muscle. But to consume 30 grams of protein for breakfast isn't an easy task. If you think about it, one egg contains only 6 grams of protein. So 2 eggs is 12 grams of protein. So unless you're a big meat or fish eater, and not everyone is, and not everyone wants to have meat or fish for breakfast, it can be quite difficult to get that consumption. So what can you do? Well, one thing you can do is consume protein shakes as part of your breakfast. So you can get 22 to 30 grams of protein just from a protein shake for breakfast. And the most beneficial protein shake I would suggest is whey protein. But if you're lactose intolerant or you're vegan, you can get protein shakes with pea proteins. And that is going to be significantly beneficial to build your muscle. Now, how do you build muscle having consumed adequate amounts of protein? So I suggest that the best way to build muscle is resistance training. Now, what is resistance training? Resistance training can take various forms. That might be lifting weights, machine weights or free weights, or it might be the use of resistance bands, or it might be using your own body weight to build muscle. And they might be things like press-ups, squats, pull-ups, etc. And what you want to do to build muscle is to work out to what we call failure. What is failure? Failure is doing sufficient number of reps that you cannot do anymore. But you want to aim to work within the 8 to 12 repetition range. So if you're doing more than 12, able to do more than 12 repetitions, then I suggest that the weights you're lifting are probably too light for you. So you want to do that. Now, in terms of what the benefits of muscle and resistance training compared to cardiovascular training. If you weight train, you gain weight training and resistance training, you're burning calories hours after you've conducted your workout, and because it increases your metabolic rate. Whereas if you're just doing cardiovascular training, you're not necessarily going to get the same benefits. Muscle mass also means that you're disposing of glucose. You've got the muscle is the largest endocrine organ in your body for the disposal of glucose. And so you've got an extra method of disposing of glucose. What about cardiovascular exercise? Is that important? Yes, it is. And how cardiovascular exercise is measured, cardiovascular fitness, is the ability, what it actually is the ability to absorb and use oxygen when you are working out. What is the best way of a form of cardiovascular exercise? I would suggest that HIIT training is the best form of cardiovascular exercise. What is HIIT training? HIIT training is high intensity interval training. And an example of this is if you were to use a bike or a treadmill, run as fast as you can for 45 seconds, like a lion or a tiger is chasing you. And after those 45 seconds, you'll be out of breath. And then wait until you've got your breath back. Once you've got your breath back, you then repeat another 2 or 3 times. And that is the most efficient form of exercise, or cardiovascular exercise, and it's more beneficial than doing a 40-minute jog, for example. And I try and work out about 2 times a week, and I try and do resistance training followed by HIIT training after that. Next I'm going to move on to diabetes. What is diabetes and how is it caused? Diabetes is essentially called the result of too much blood sugar in your blood. How do you get too much sugar in your blood? Well, when you consume sugar, you've got insulin that's secreted, and that insulin is used to be pushed into the cells. So if you imagine your cells as a door, and insulin is the key that opens the door, you consume sugar or carbohydrates, and then your pancreas will release insulin, and that insulin will then open the doors to the cells and allow the sugar into the cells. But if you consume too much sugar over a long period of time, what then happens is that the insulin stops working. The cells do not respond to the insulin, and that's what we call insulin resistance. And then we've got insulin resistance, the key to the door is no longer opening, and then we've got sugar accumulating in the blood that can then lead to diabetes. Leading on from that, we've got what we call the blood sugar roller coaster. Now, if you consume sugar first thing in the morning for breakfast, for example, high amounts, you're going to get a spike in blood sugar. And what's that doing? Well, you're going to get an insulin release from that spike, but then sometimes what will happen is that the insulin will overshoot and then will result in taking out too much sugar from the blood, which can then lead you to feel lethargic, cranky, and feeling tired and in craving more sugar. And then if you then respond to that by having more sugar, then the same thing can happen, and we go through this blood sugar roller coaster throughout the day, which then can lead to diabetes. Now, if you have protein for breakfast, high levels, and cut down on your carbs, you can avoid that, because protein is very satiating and doesn't raise your blood sugars as much as a carbohydrate-rich meal. Hence, it's important to have a high protein breakfast. Now, moving on to foods. What foods are good for you? What foods are good for you? Well, these foods here are good for you. And generally foods that contain polyphenols are very good for you. But what are polyphenols? Polyphenols are plant compounds that neutralize free radicals in your body. Now, what are free radicals? Free radicals are unstable compounds which get released after you consume unhealthy foods such as sugar or seed oils, and they damage everything that they touch, and they can damage your cells, and over the long term they cause diseases. So we need polyphenols to neutralize those free radicals to keep healthy. And some of those foods are coffee. So coffee is high in polyphenols, and I would suggest consuming 2 to 3 cups of coffee a day. Studies have shown that's very beneficial to your health. You need to avoid consuming caffeine too late in the day, as we'll come to, because it's generally high in caffeine, it can affect your sleep. But decaffeinated coffee can still have the same benefits as caffeinated coffee, because they generally have the same levels of polyphenols. Dark chocolate. Now, I think a lot of people are aware of the benefits of dark chocolate, but it needs to be the right dark chocolate. So dark chocolate with a minimum of 70% cocoa solids, I would suggest. But ideally 85% plus dark chocolate is what we want to be looking for. And I consume 4 to 6 squares of dark chocolate a day for my health, which is equivalent to about 10 to 15 grams of dark chocolate. Avocados. I think a lot of people have heard that avocados are very good for your health, but why? They're packed with nutrients, and they're very good for your brain health, and high in polyphenols. What other foods are good for you? Well, vegetables, as everyone knows, vegetables are good for you, but why are they good for you? The main reason why vegetables are generally known as prebiotics, and they contain high amounts of fibre. And why is fibre good for you? Because what it does is it feeds your microbiome, it feeds your gut. And your gut contains good bacteria, bad bacteria, and pathogens. And by consuming fibre, you're feeding all the good bacteria and getting that microbiome to grow. Now, why is the microbiome important? Because it's the foundations of our immune system. So consuming most vegetables, green leafy vegetables and all vegetables, high in fibre is good for your microbiome. What other foods are good for you? You've got a category of foods called probiotics. Now, most people know probiotics, not to be confused with prebiotics. So prebiotics are the fibres that you have when you consume and they get into the gut and then they feed the beneficial bacteria. Whereas probiotics, which everyone associates that with the capsules that you consume that have got beneficial bacteria in them. But there are foods that are considered to be probiotics because they already contain billions of beneficial bacteria. And those foods are kefir, which is a fermented yogurt, which is very good for you. And then we've got sauerkraut, which is fermented cabbage, kimchi, which is contains fermented cabbage and other vegetables. And then we've also got kombucha, which is like a tea-type drink, which is fermented and it's got lots of beneficial bacteria. And there's one particular brand which is good, which is called Number One Living, which is a very decent tasting kombucha, and that was created by Johnny Wilkinson, who's a former rugby player. Now, moving on to sleep. If we took sleep, exercise and nutrition, which do you think would be the most important out of the three? Some people might say nutrition. I would suggest it's sleep. Why? Because if we don't get adequate amounts of sleep, then that can affect our nutrition and our exercise. Why is that? Because if we don't get adequate amounts of sleep, then what can happen is that we lose our self-control and also we get sugar cravings. And sleep is really good for you because when you sleep, for various reasons, but when you sleep, it clears out all of the garbage that's in your brain and also restores our well-being, reduces stress, and has various other benefits to it. But in terms of the benefits of sleep, what can be done? Well, there are various benefits of sleep. In order to get good sleep, it's very important to go for a morning walk, 20 minutes, get those natural sun rays into your eyes because that sets your circadian rhythm. So if you get those sunlight rays into your eyes, by the time it gets to the evening time, you're more likely to get a decent night's sleep. That's one thing that you could do. Consume magnesium, depending on the right type, the various types of magnesium, so you have to consume the right amounts of magnesium, and that is beneficial to your sleep. And then we've got other things that you can do. Blue light is particularly not good for your sleep, so wear blue light blocking glasses with red tint to them, and if you wear them 2 hours before you go to bed, you are then reducing the blue light that you're getting exposed to from TV, mobile phones, and your LED lights that you've got. Do not consume food 3 hours before you go to bed because that will affect your digestive system. And if you're digesting food when you go to sleep, you will not necessarily get good night's sleep. Get the temperature down in your room to 18 to 20 degrees because if your core body temperature is high, you're less likely to be able to get a good night's sleep. What things should you not do? Consume alcohol. Some people say, well, they get the best night's sleep after a nightcap. I would suggest that's not the case because what alcohol is, it's a sedative, so it knocks you out and you're likely to be getting fragmented sleep and not decent quality sleep. And so although some people think they get good night's sleep, they're not. Similarly with coffee, if you drink coffee, coffee has a quarter life of 10 to 12 hours. So if you're consuming coffee at say midday, then you've got a quarter of the caffeine running around your brain at midnight. potentially, depending on how fast you metabolize caffeine. So I'd say suggest avoiding caffeine after midday. Some people think, well, I can have a cup of coffee after my meal and I'm fine, I can sleep right through the night, but I would suggest that although you may think you're having a night sleep, the quality of the sleep may not be as good as you think it is. Now, moving on to supplementation. So, what are the good things that you can take? So there are various supplements that you can take for your health, but I would suggest there are 4 things that you can take to benefit your health. And they are vitamins D, A, K, and E. So vitamin D, everyone knows about vitamin D, you get naturally from sunlight. And that's extremely beneficial for various reasons. It's good for your bone health, it's good for your calcium levels in your blood, good for your mood. But obviously in this country at this time of year, the bone health, the natural sunlight, you're not getting so much. So you suggest a supplement with vitamin D3, which contains, it's just a dose of 4,000 IU a day. Then we've got vitamin K2. Has anyone heard of vitamin K2? Yes, so vitamin K2 works synergistically with vitamin D3, but it's very important to take vitamin K2 if you're having D3. The reason for that is that D3 then can result in an accumulation of calcium in your blood, which can lead to blood calcification over time, which can lead to heart disease. And what K2 does, it transports the calcium from your blood into your bones, so it makes your bones stronger. That's important. What about vitamin A? What's the most important, what foods contain vitamin A? I think the most important thing, the most common thing is carrots. People say carrots are high in vitamin A. That's not strictly true, because they actually contain beta-carotene, which is essentially not, it's a precursor to vitamin A. So beta-carotene then gets converted to vitamin A, as with many other vegetables. But pre-formed vitamin A, in the readily absorbable form, is contained in foods such as liver, and obviously you can take it as a supplement. So the supplement that you might take would be a retinyl palmitate, and 3,000 IU retinyl palmitate is a good one for that. And vitamin A is good for your reproduction, for your growth, your immunity, and other things. And finally, vitamin E, which is also good for your immunity, your eyes, your skin, and your brain health, particularly your brain health, which is said to lead to a decrease in Alzheimer's disease. That's particularly important. And you can take that in supplemental form, for avocados, particularly high vitamin E. Well, that's the end of my speech today. Thank you for listening and coming. And I offer a mentoring session if any of you are interested in this. And what I do is I offer 6 sessions which last 45 minutes each over a period of 12 weeks. And I take your objectives and I then attempt to implement that into your daily life by guiding you on the best way in order to implement small changes that can make a big difference in your life. And the cost of that is £200, but I'm offering a 10% discount for the first 5 people who sign up today. So, thank you very much for listening. If anyone's got any questions, please let me know. Do we have any questions? Okay, thank you very much.